Welcome to a story that might feel strangely familiar. Not because you've lived this exact life, but because you've lived the same fears, the same doubts, the same silent battles inside your mind. This is not just a story for reading and listening practice. This is not just another English exercise you do because you feel you should. This story is something deeper. Something you feel in your chest, something that wakes up a part of you that's been quiet for too long. You're here because you want to grow, not only in English, but in life. You want to speak with confidence. You want to express yourself clearly. You want to stop holding back when you have something to say. You want to stop feeling small in moments where you should feel strong. And maybe, without saying it out loud, you want to become a new version of yourself. A version you've imagined many times, but never fully believed you could reach. This story is your chance to walk beside someone who lived through the same struggle. Someone who knows what it feels like to freeze when it matters. Someone who knows the pain of staying silent. Someone who knows the shame of wanting to speak but not trusting your own voice. And someone who finally changed everything, not by luck, not by magic, but by facing himself day after day until confidence became a part of him. As you read or listen, your English will grow naturally. You will learn through emotion, through pictures, through moments that stay in your mind. But the real lesson here is not about language. It's about courage. It's about taking control. It's about finally saying, "Enough, I deserve more." This story is an invitation to sit with yourself, to look at your fear honestly, to see that you are not broken, you are becoming, to understand that confidence is not only possible for you, it is waiting for you. And it begins with one simple decision. Keep reading. Keep listening. Keep going, even when it feels uncomfortable. So, as you begin this story, open yourself to more than English improvement. Open yourself to the possibility that you too can become a more confident, stronger, more present version of yourself. The journey starts now. My name is Daniel. I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life, I lived inside a prison that nobody else could see. It wasn't made of metal or concrete. It was made of fear, silence, and the belief that I wasn't good enough. If you saw me at school, at work, or even in a small group of friends, you would have probably said, "Daniel is the quiet one." And you would have been right. I was the guy who always sat in the back, the guy who avoided eye contact, the guy who rehearsed every sentence in his head before speaking but still couldn't say it out loud. I had ideas. I had dreams. I had opinions, but they never escaped my mouth. They lived inside me like birds trapped in a cage. People sometimes think confidence is a personality trait, like eye color or height. They think some people are born loud, bold, and fearless, while others are naturally soft and shy. I believed that too. I believed confidence was something other people had. Not me. But today, people look at me and say, "Daniel, you speak with power. You look calm. You carry yourself differently. What happened to you?" And every time I hear that, I smile because I know the truth. I wasn't born confident. I built it. Slowly. Through pain. Through embarrassment. Through moments that broke me and forced me to rebuild myself piece by piece. If you feel shy, if you feel small when you speak, if you feel invisible in a room, if you avoid conversations because you don't trust your own voice, I want you to know this. I understand you. I was you. And I want to tell you the story of the day that changed everything for me. The day that kicked me out of my comfort zone and forced me to face the problem I tried to ignore for years. I'm not telling you this to sound inspirational. I'm telling you this because the truth hurts, but it also heals. It happened on a completely normal Thursday afternoon. The sky wasn't dramatic. The weather wasn't special. But this ordinary day would become the biggest turning point in my life. I had an interview for a job I desperately wanted. I prepared for it for weeks. I watched videos, practiced answers, researched the company, and even rehearsed in front of the mirror like a nervous actor. I told myself I was ready. I told myself I would stay calm. I told myself this time would be different. But deep down, a small, quiet voice whispered the truth. What if you freeze again? I remember walking into the office. The walls were bright, the furniture looked new, and the air smelled like fresh coffee and printer paper. My hands were sweating so much I kept wiping them on my pants. My heart was beating so loudly it felt like a drum inside my chest. My legs were shaking slightly, and I prayed nobody noticed. I sat in the waiting room, pretending to read the company brochure, but the words were blurry because my mind was already panicking. The receptionist smiled at me, and I tried to smile back, but my face felt stiff like it forgot how to move. Then the interviewer walked in. He was tall, confident, and calm. The type of person who makes you feel judged without even trying. He shook my hand, and I could feel my palm sticking to his. We sat down, and he opened his notebook. The room felt too bright, too quiet, too serious. Then he asked the simplest question in the world. So, Daniel, tell me about yourself. That was it. A question I practiced 100 times. A question every interview starts with. But the moment those words reached my ears, something strange happened. My mind went blank, completely blank, like someone unplugged my brain. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I tried again. Nothing. My throat felt tight. My chest felt heavy. My face started burning. I could feel sweat rolling down my back. The silence in the room was so painful I wanted to scream. The interviewer raised an eyebrow. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, but that made it worse. Because I wasn't okay. Not even close. I finally forced myself to speak, but the words came out small, shaky, and broken. I'm sorry. I'm nervous. He nodded politely, but I already knew it was over. I tried answering his questions, but my voice kept cracking. My sentences felt empty. My confidence collapsed completely. I felt like a child pretending to be an adult. When the interview ended, he shook my hand again, and I saw pity in his eyes. Not respect, not interest, pity. I walked out of the building trying to breathe. The moment the door closed behind me, all the emotions hit me at once. I wasn't sad about the job. I was sad about myself. I stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by strangers who were laughing, talking, living their lives, while I felt like a ghost watching from the outside. I walked a few steps, then stopped. My eyes began to fill with tears. Not loud, dramatic tears. Silent, painful tears that fall when your heart is tired of pretending. I asked myself, why am I still like this? Why does fear control me? Why can't I speak when it matters? How many opportunities will I lose because of this? In that moment, something inside me cracked. It wasn't weakness. It was truth. A hard truth. a truth I should have faced years ago. I realized that if I didn't change now, nothing would ever change. My future would look exactly like my past, silent, small, full of regrets. And then a thought hit me like a punch. Daniel, nobody is coming to save you. It's you versus you. I wiped my face with my sleeve, took a deep breath, and whispered a single word to myself. Enough. Enough hiding. Enough fear. Enough running away from conversations. Enough hating myself for staying quiet. Enough letting my insecurities decide my future. That night, I made a promise to myself. A dangerous promise. A powerful promise. A promise that scared me but also excited me. I will become confident. I will destroy this version of me. I will rebuild myself no matter how long it takes. And that promise became the beginning of my 90-day transformation. The day after the interview, I woke up with the same heavy feeling in my chest. You know that feeling. When you open your eyes and remember what happened yesterday, and it hits you again like a punch. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the silence in that interview room. The frozen moment. The embarrassment, the pity in the interviewer's eyes. It all came back so clearly that I felt the shame rise inside me again. But something else was there too. A fire. A small one, but real. A fire that whispered, "This is your chance. Don't waste it." I sat up, rubbed my face, and made a decision that felt stronger than anything I had decided before. I would rebuild myself from zero. I didn't know how. I didn't know where to start. But I knew I had to begin today, not tomorrow, not next week, not when life felt easier. Today. The first thing I realized was this. Most people fail because they wait for motivation. They wait to feel ready. They wait for the perfect moment. But the perfect moment doesn't exist. If I waited for confidence to appear magically, I would stay the same forever. So I told myself the truth. Daniel, you don't need motivation. You need discipline. Motivation comes and goes like the weather. Discipline stays. Discipline is the engine that moves you forward even when you feel tired, scared, or lost. That morning, I opened a blank notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of the page. 90 days only, not a year, not someday, just 90 days. It felt manageable. It felt specific. It felt like a challenge I couldn't run away from. On the first day, I focused on the biggest mistake shy people make, something I had done my entire life without realizing it. The mistake was avoiding discomfort. Every time I felt nervous, every time I felt fear, every time I felt socially awkward, I escaped. I avoided eye contact, avoided conversations, avoided opportunities, avoided everything that made me feel exposed. And that is exactly why I never grew. Confidence doesn't grow in comfort. It grows in discomfort. It grows when your heart races and your hands shake and your mind screams, "Run!" But you stay anyway. So, I wrote a simple rule for myself. Do one uncomfortable thing every day. Not 10 things. Not impossible things. Just one small action that scared me a little. That first day, my uncomfortable action was making eye contact with strangers while walking down the street. It sounds stupid. It sounds small. But for someone like me, it felt like lifting a heavy weight. I walked to the supermarket and forced myself to look people in the eyes for 1 second. Just 1 second. At first, my stomach twisted every time. My brain kept saying, "Look away, Daniel. Don't make it weird." But I didn't stop. I kept doing it again and again, until something surprising happened. I didn't die. Nobody attacked me. Nobody made fun of me. Most people just looked back, then looked away. That's it. And I realized something important. Most of the fear I carried was imaginary. It existed only in my mind. On day 2, my uncomfortable action was ordering food with a loud, clear voice instead of my usual quiet mumbling. I stood in line rehearsing my sentence a dozen times, feeling ridiculous. But when it was my turn, I lifted my chin, took a breath, and said, "Hi, can I have a medium latte, please?" Not whispering, not shaky. Clear. The barista didn't care. She just typed it into the machine. But inside me, something changed. A tiny victory. A tiny piece of confidence. A tiny moment that felt like progress. By day 5, I decided to take it a step further. Every morning, I practiced standing tall in front of the mirror with my shoulders back, chest open, chin up, and eyes forward. I realized something powerful. Your body talks before your mouth does. If your posture says, "I am small," people will treat you like you are small. But if your posture says, "I belong here," people respond differently. I felt stupid the first few times, standing there like some kind of superhero. But slowly, I noticed that my body began to remember the posture even when I wasn't thinking about it. As the days passed, I built a simple routine that became the foundation of my transformation. Every day started with 5 minutes of deep breathing to control the anxiety in my body. Then 10 minutes of reading something positive or motivating. Then my one uncomfortable action rule. And at night, I wrote in my notebook, what did I do today that made me stronger? What did I avoid that I should face tomorrow? This notebook became my biggest ally. It didn't judge me. It didn't pressure me. It simply helped me see my progress. Around day 10, something unexpected happened. I noticed I was speaking a little louder, not shouting, just using a normal human volume instead of my usual quiet whisper. I also noticed that my shoulders were less tense when I walked. I even realized I was looking at people's faces more naturally. These were small changes, but small changes matter because they stack. Every time you do something small, it becomes a brick. And every brick builds your new identity day by day. By day 12, the old version of me started fighting back. Fear always fights when it feels you growing. I woke up one morning feeling tired and unmotivated. The little voice in my head said, "Skip today. One day doesn't matter." But I remembered something important. Every time you skip, you teach your brain to quit. So I forced myself to do my uncomfortable action anyway. That day, I asked a stranger for directions even though I didn't need them. My voice shook a little, but I did it. And after that small moment, the rest of the day felt easier. By day 15, something clicked. Not a big breakthrough yet, but a shift. A small certainty. I realized that confidence wasn't some magical quality I had to find. It was a skill, a muscle, a habit. And like any skill, it grew when I trained it and died when I ignored it. The first 15 days taught me this simple truth. The person I was becoming was not the same person who walked out of that interview feeling defeated. I was changing slowly, quietly, but definitely. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. By the time day 16 arrived, I noticed something interesting happening inside me. It wasn't confidence yet, not the real kind, but it was the awareness that I was capable of more than I believed. It was like a small voice inside me had finally woken up after years of sleeping. Every day, that voice grew a little stronger. And even though the fear was still there, my actions were slowly becoming louder than the fear. I didn't wait for the fear to disappear anymore. I moved with it. I walked with it. I talked with it sitting in my chest. That was a huge shift, because for most of my life, I believed I had to wait until the fear was gone before I could act. But those first 2 weeks taught me the truth. Confidence doesn't come first. Action comes first. Confidence follows. Around day 18, I decided it was time to challenge myself with something bigger than eye contact or ordering food. I needed something that pushed me into real discomfort. So I chose a task that made my stomach twist at the very thought of it, starting conversations. Not deep conversations, not long ones, just simple, short, human connections. For most people, this sounds normal, but for me, it felt like climbing a mountain with no rope. I walked to a bookstore and wandered around pretending to look at books. I rehearsed a simple line in my head. Have you read this one? Is it good? I must have rehearsed it 100 times in 10 minutes. My heart was beating fast. My palms were sweating again. But I forced myself to walk toward a man standing in the fiction section. I opened my mouth, and the sentence came out shaky but real. He smiled and told me he had just bought the book last week. We talked for maybe 20 seconds, nothing more. But when I walked out of that bookstore, I felt like I had just won a battle against a version of myself I no longer wanted to be. By day 20, something else happened. I stopped avoiding mirrors. Before beginning this journey, I couldn't look at myself for long. Not because I hated the way I looked, but because I hated the way I felt. Mirrors forced me to face the truth that I didn't believe in myself, that I wasn't living the life I wanted, that I was hiding from the world. But now, standing in front of the mirror was becoming easier. I saw a person who was trying, a person who was moving, a person who was fighting. And there is something powerful about seeing yourself taking action. It builds trust with yourself. Most shy people don't lack confidence in others. They lack confidence in themselves. They don't trust their own ability to handle discomfort. But every time I took a small step, that trust grew. On day 22, I had my first setback, a real one. I had planned to ask a coworker a question during a team meeting. A simple question, nothing special. But when the moment came, I froze. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My chest tightened. My hand shook slightly under the table. The old me came back stronger than I expected. After the meeting ended, I felt frustrated and angry. I walked into the bathroom, stared at myself, and whispered, "Why did you do that? Why didn't you speak?" I felt like I had failed myself. But then a different thought appeared. Setbacks are not proof that you're weak. Setbacks are proof that you're trying something new. That realization helped me calm down. I promised myself I would try again the next day. And I did. The next few days were strange. Almost like I was living between two worlds. The old world where I stayed quiet, and the new world where I forced myself to speak. Some moments I felt proud. Some moments I felt frustrated. Some moments I felt strong. Some moments I felt like running away from everything, but I kept pushing anyway. On day 25, I made a rule that changed everything for me. When you want to escape, stay 2 more seconds. Just 2 seconds. Not 10. Not 30. Just 2. When I wanted to avoid someone's eyes, I held eye contact for 2 seconds more. When I wanted to whisper, I forced myself to raise my voice 2 seconds before speaking. When I wanted to skip a conversation, I took 2 steps forward instead of walking away. These 2 seconds became my secret weapon. Because confidence grows in those extra 2 seconds. That's where the growth lives. Around day 27, I realized something important about myself. I used to think confidence was about speaking perfectly, about saying the right words, about never making mistakes. But while practicing, I discovered something surprising. Confidence is not about being perfect. It's about being present. People don't care if you say a sentence that's not perfect. People don't care if you pause or take a breath. People don't care if your voice shakes a little. What people respond to is authenticity. When I stopped trying to sound perfect and started focusing on being real, conversations became easier. I didn't try to impress anyone. I simply tried to connect. Day 28 was the first day I noticed my social anxiety decreasing. Not disappearing, just decreasing. I walked into a coffee shop, and instead of planning every possible sentence in my head, I simply stood in line, looked around, and stayed calm. My brain wasn't racing, my chest wasn't tight, I wasn't overthinking every movement. It felt like a small cloud of fear had lifted from my shoulders. And I remember thinking, maybe confidence is not a personality. Maybe it's a habit. By day 30, I had a moment that made me smile without even noticing. I was walking through the park, and I passed a group of people laughing loudly. Before, I would have looked at the ground and walked faster, but this time, I walked normally. My shoulders stayed open. My eyes stayed forward. I didn't shrink myself. I didn't make myself smaller. I didn't run. And that simple moment, one that most people would never notice, felt like proof that 30 days of small steps were changing something big inside me. On day 31, I sat on my bed writing in my notebook, and I realized how far I had come in 1 month. I wasn't the same person who cried outside the interview building. I wasn't the same person who whispered in conversations. I wasn't the same person who avoided discomfort. I was learning to face fear. I was learning to speak. I was learning to show myself to the world. And even though I had a long way to go, I knew one truth deep in my soul. The transformation had officially begun. When day 32 arrived, something inside me felt different. It wasn't confidence yet, but it was the sense that confidence was no longer a distant dream. It was starting to feel like something I could actually reach if I kept pushing. But the next phase of my journey wasn't about small actions anymore. The foundation was built. The basics were done. Now it was time to step into real practice, the kind that makes your heart beat fast, the kind that forces you to grow even when every part of you wants to hide. I realized that if I wanted real change, I needed real challenges. Not just eye contact or ordering coffee, but situations that forced me to use my voice, my presence, my energy, my courage. Around day 33, I made a bold decision. I would start practicing speaking in longer conversations. Not one sentence, not a quick comment. Actual conversations where I had to stay present, listen, respond, and keep the connection alive. This terrified me. Long conversations always exhausted me mentally because I stayed in my head too much. I analyzed every word, every expression, every reaction, but I knew the only way to stop overthinking conversations was to have more of them. So that week, I started greeting my coworkers more intentionally. Instead of just saying hi, I added one more sentence like, "How's your morning going?" Or, "Did you see the weather today?" These may sound like small things, but for me, it felt like stepping into a world I had always avoided. To my surprise, people responded warmly. Some smiled, some chatted back. And suddenly, I realized something incredible. The world isn't as scary as your mind tells you it is. On day 35, I challenged myself with something bigger. I joined a group lunch at work. Normally, I would avoid these moments, sit alone, or pretend I was busy. Group settings always made me feel like a ghost, present but invisible. But that day, I walked to the table and sat down. My heart was beating fast, but I stayed. Everyone was laughing and talking over each other, and for a moment, I felt myself shrinking inside. But then I remembered my rule: stay 2 seconds longer. So I stayed. And then I said something small, a comment about the food. Someone heard it and responded. Another person joined. Suddenly, I was part of the conversation. I wasn't just a body in the room. I was a voice. And when I walked back to my desk afterward, I felt like I had conquered a mountain. By day 38, I understood something deeply important. Confidence grows faster when you put yourself in unpredictable situations. So, I looked for moments that weren't controlled or rehearsed, moments where anything could happen. That week, I challenged myself to talk to new people. Not friends, not co-workers, but strangers who didn't know me. I talked to a man sitting on a bench reading a book. I said hello to a woman walking her dog. I asked a cashier how her day was going. These were short conversations, but they forced me to face fear without preparation. And something magical happened. The fear began losing power. Not completely, but enough for me to feel a shift. Day 40 arrived with a new level of understanding. I noticed that my voice was becoming more stable. My posture felt more natural. My thoughts were becoming clearer. But there was still one big enemy I hadn't defeated yet: the fear of speaking up in groups. So on day 41, I set a challenge I had always been terrified of. I would participate in the next team meeting, not with a full speech, not with a long explanation, just one idea, just one sentence. During the meeting, my heart was racing, but when the moment came, I raised my hand slightly and shared my opinion. It wasn't perfect. My voice shook a little. But I spoke. And when I finished, nobody laughed. Nobody judged. In fact, one coworker nodded and said, "Good point." That small moment felt like 10 steps forward. After that meeting, I realized something huge. People are not thinking about you as much as you think they are. Everyone is worried about their own lives, their own problems, their own image. When I understood this, social pressure became lighter. The weight I used to feel on my chest reduced, almost like someone had loosened a tight rope around my body. By day 45, I felt myself becoming more alive, more expressive, more like someone who belonged in conversations instead of someone who was watching life happen from the outside. Around day 47, the journey became harder again. Growth is not a straight line, and fear doesn't disappear politely. It fights. It returns. It tests you. One evening, I attended a small gathering with friends, and for some reason, My anxiety came back stronger than ever. I barely spoke. My throat felt tight. My old self tried to rise again, the version of me that wanted to stay silent. When I got home that night, frustration hit me hard. I sat on my bed and asked myself, why am I still like this sometimes? Why does the fear return? But after a few minutes, I realized something important. Growth doesn't mean you stop feeling fear. Growth means you handle fear better. The next morning, day 48, I made a new rule. When fear returns, don't run. Welcome it. Talk to it. Move with it. So that day, I forced myself to do something scary. I approached a group of 3 co-workers who were talking near the coffee machine and joined the conversation for 1 minute. Just 1 minute. My voice shook a little, but I stayed anyway. And when I walked away, I felt proud. Not because I was perfect, but because I was brave. By day 50, something amazing was happening that I didn't even notice at first. People were treating me differently. They were talking to me more, greeting me more, including me in more conversations. It wasn't because I had become a different person. It was because I stopped hiding. People can feel when you open yourself. They can sense when you are present. They respond to that energy. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be seen. Day 52 was a realization day. I understood that confidence isn't loud. Confidence isn't about being the funniest person in the room or the most talkative. Real confidence is quiet strength. It's the feeling of being comfortable with who you are. It's the ability to speak when needed and stay silent when you choose, not because you're scared, but because you're in control. That kind of confidence was beginning to grow inside me. By day 55, I felt something new, something powerful. I wasn't just acting confident anymore. I was becoming confident. My actions were shaping my identity, and every day I felt a little more like the person I always wanted to be. By the time I reached day 56, I learned something most people never understand. Confidence isn't one big moment that changes your life. It's hundreds of small moments that build on each other like tiny bricks. Every challenge I faced, every uncomfortable action I took, every conversation I started, every moment I stayed 2 seconds longer, all of it was slowly shaping a new version of me. And now, I could feel that version becoming stronger. But something else was happening too. The challenges were getting harder, not because the world changed, but because I was ready for more. I wasn't the same guy who froze in the interview room. I wasn't the same guy who shook while ordering coffee. I wasn't the same guy pretending to look at his phone just to avoid human interaction. I was moving forward, and now life was pushing me into deeper waters. Around day 57, I started noticing a pattern in myself. The more I practiced speaking, the more I understood that confidence was tied to honesty. For years, I hid my true thoughts. I said what was safe instead of what I really believed. I nodded even when I disagreed. I stayed silent when something bothered me. I pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. But now my challenge was to speak honestly, to say what I truly thought without fear of judgment. That day, during a small discussion with coworkers, someone shared an opinion I disagreed with. Normally, I would just nod and keep quiet, but something in me said, "This is your moment." So I said calmly, "I see your point, but I actually think differently." The room went quiet for a second, not in a bad way, just in surprise. and then the conversation continued normally. Nobody attacked me. Nobody dismissed me. In fact, a few people seemed interested in what I said. When I walked away from that conversation, I realized how powerful honesty is. When you speak your truth, your voice grows stronger. On day 60, I decided to take on a new challenge, something I had avoided my entire life, giving opinions publicly. Not a speech, not a presentation, nothing that dramatic. Just sharing my thoughts in front of a group, even in small ways. During a meeting, our manager asked if anyone had ideas for improving a project. Normally, this is the moment I would look at my notebook, pretend to write something, and pray the moment would pass. But that day, I raised my hand slightly and shared a simple suggestion. My voice wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and the manager said, "That's a great idea." Hearing those words felt like someone poured warm sunlight into my chest. It wasn't the idea itself that mattered. It was the fact that I spoke, I contributed, I showed up. And that small moment made me realize something important. People respect you when you respect yourself enough to speak. The next few days were filled with both victories and challenges. On day 62, I had one of those moments where confidence suddenly disappears for no reason. I was walking toward the office entrance and saw a group of people talking near the door. Instantly, that old voice rose inside my head. Don't walk through them. Wait. Avoid them. It shocked me because I thought I was past that fear. But fear doesn't disappear forever. It hides, waits, and tests you. I stopped for a second, took a breath, and remembered my rule. Stay 2 seconds longer. So I walked straight through, nodded, said, "Good morning," and kept moving. It sounds simple, but that small moment reminded me that confidence must be practiced every day. If you stop using it, you lose it. Around day 65, something powerful began to happen. People started trusting me more. They asked for my opinion. They invited me to discussions. They included me without me having to force it. This wasn't because I suddenly became the most interesting person in the room. It was because my energy changed. My presence changed. I was no longer hiding or shrinking or hoping nobody noticed me. I was showing up, and people respond to energy more than words. Confidence isn't about talking a lot. It's about showing the world you believe you belong in the room. By day 68, I realized that growth also means facing harder emotional challenges. Confidence isn't only about speaking, it's about standing up for yourself. That day, a coworker made a joke about something I said in a meeting. Nothing cruel, but something that would have hurt me deeply in the past. Normally, I would laugh awkwardly or stay silent and let the moment eat me alive inside. But this time, I looked at him and said calmly, "I know you're joking, but I'd prefer if you didn't say that." He raised his eyebrows, then nodded. The moment passed, and I felt something heavy lift off my chest. Standing up for yourself is one of the strongest forms of confidence. It tells your mind, I matter, my feelings matter, my voice matters. On day 70, I had a breakthrough that changed everything. I was sitting alone at home after work, writing in my notebook, when a thought hit me out of nowhere. Confidence wasn't something I was chasing anymore. It was something I was becoming. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an imposter pretending to be confident. I felt like someone building a foundation that could last. I felt like someone who had the power to enter a room without shrinking, someone who could speak without trembling, someone who could handle discomfort without breaking. In the following days, the challenges increased naturally, not because I forced them, but because my world was expanding. On day 72, someone invited me to join a project I never would have accepted before my transformation. It required speaking, planning, collaborating, all things that scared me in the past, but now I said yes. Not because I felt perfectly ready, but because I trusted myself to figure it out. And trusting yourself is the deepest form of confidence. By day 75, I felt a confidence I had never experienced in my life. Not the loud confidence of people who talk nonstop. Not the fake confidence of people who pretend to be better than everyone else. My confidence was quiet, solid, grounded. It was the kind of confidence that comes from facing fear again and again until fear loses its control over you. I started entering rooms without looking at the floor. I started speaking without rehearsing every word in my head. I started living instead of surviving. And on day 77, something small but meaningful happened. I looked in the mirror, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the shy boy who hid from the world. I saw a man who fought for himself, a man who refused to stay small, a man who decided to rebuild himself one uncomfortable step at a time. I still had 13 days left in my 90-day journey, but something inside me knew the truth. I was already becoming the version of myself I once believed was impossible. By the time day 78 arrived, I started to feel a shift that was deeper than anything I had felt before. It wasn't just about talking more or standing taller. It was something internal, something emotional, something powerful. I felt like I was no longer fighting the world. I was fighting for myself, and that is a completely different kind of battle. Before, every social situation felt like a war where I had to protect myself from judgment, embarrassment, or failure. But now, every moment felt like a mission where I was proving to myself that I could grow, evolve, and step into the version of me I once envied in other people. This new mindset made me feel alive in a way I had never experienced. Around day 79, I realized something important. Confidence is not a destination. It's a direction. It's a way of moving through the world. It's a way of choosing courage over comfort, again and again, until courage becomes natural. That day, I practiced something that scared me for years. Initiating a conversation that had no purpose, not asking for something, not responding, just starting a conversation for connection. I was in an elevator with someone from another department. Normally, I would stare at the doors, pray for the elevator to move faster, and pretend silence was my only option. But that day, I said, "How's your week going?" He smiled and started talking. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but it felt like a victory because I wasn't speaking from fear. I was speaking from choice. On day 80, I faced a challenge that tested my progress. My manager asked if I could help present a small update during our next team meeting. Before my 90-day journey, I would have panicked, invented an excuse, or tried to avoid the responsibility completely. But now, something inside me felt ready. Not comfortable, but ready. There's a difference. Comfort tells you to stay small. Readiness tells you to grow. I said yes, and the moment the word left my mouth, my heart jumped. I felt nervous, of course. But it was the good kind of nervous, the kind that tells you you're moving in the right direction. During the next couple of days, I prepared for that small presentation. But here's the surprising part. I didn't rehearse every word like I used to. I didn't memorize lines. I didn't plan every breath. Instead, I practiced speaking in a natural, calm tone. I reminded myself that perfection wasn't the goal, presence was. I stood in front of the mirror and spoke like a real human, not like a robot trying to impress everyone. Confidence isn't about sounding perfect. It's about sounding real. And the more I accepted that, the easier speaking became. Day 82 came faster than I expected, and with it, the presentation. I walked into the meeting room with my notebook and a calm determination. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't sweating. My heart was beating fast, but not in a painful way. More in a powerful way, like it was giving me energy. When it was my turn, I stood up, took a breath, and spoke. My voice wasn't perfect, but it was steady. I made eye contact with the team. I stayed present. I didn't rush. I didn't hide. And when I finished, the manager smiled and said, "Thank you, Daniel. That was clear. Clear, not brilliant, not amazing, but clear." And that word meant everything to me. It meant I was no longer invisible. It meant I was no longer scared of my own voice. It meant I had stepped into a world I once thought I didn't belong in. After the meeting, something unexpected happened. A coworker came to me and said, "You're getting better at speaking. I can see your confidence growing." Hearing that felt surreal. People were noticing my transformation. Not because I was loud or flashy, but because I was present. And presence is powerful. Presence is what makes people trust you. Presence is what makes people respect you. Presence is what makes people listen. By day 84, I started focusing on deeper fears, the fears that lived beneath the surface. Not the fear of speaking, not the fear of eye contact, but the fear of being myself fully. I had always believed that if people saw the real me, the one with insecurities, doubts, and imperfections, they would judge me. But now I was learning something different. Authenticity is magnetic. People connect with realness. People open up to honesty. People feel safe around someone who isn't pretending. So I practiced being more open. When someone asked how I was doing, I didn't just say, "Fine." I shared something real, like, "I'm doing better this week. I'm working on being more confident." And instead of judging me, people appreciated the honesty. Day 85 was a challenge I never expected. Saying no. For years, I said yes to everything because I didn't want conflict. I didn't want people to think I was rude or difficult. But saying yes all the time made me tired, stressed, and overwhelmed. So that day, when someone asked me to take on an extra task I didn't have time for, I said calmly, "I'd love to help, but I'm focusing on something important right now. I can't take more on." And the world didn't explode. The person didn't get angry. They simply nodded and said, "No problem." That moment felt huge because confidence also means protecting your time, your energy, and your boundaries. On day 87, I experienced something that almost brought tears to my eyes. I was included without asking. During lunch, a group of coworkers waved at me and said, "Come sit with us." Before my 90-day journey, this would have never happened. Not because people disliked me, but because I didn't give off the energy of someone who wanted connection. I sat with them, talked naturally, laughed, told stories, and listened. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a background character. I felt like someone who belonged. By day 88, the transformation was almost complete. The boy who hid behind silence was disappearing. The man who spoke with intention was rising. But I still had one final fear to face, speaking in a situation where all eyes were on me, not a presentation, something more emotional, more personal. And that moment came on day 89, when someone asked me how my confidence journey was going. Instead of giving a short answer, I told the truth. I explained the interview failure. I explained the fear. I explained the decision to change. And when I finished, the person looked at me and said, "That's inspiring. You should be proud." And for the first time in my life, I actually felt proud. By day 90, everything came full circle. I didn't wake up as a superhero. I didn't wake up fearless. I woke up as someone who finally respected himself. Someone who could walk into a room without shrinking. Someone who could speak without shaking. Someone who could look people in the eyes and stand tall. Someone who built confidence, not in one moment, but in 90 days of courage, practice, discomfort, and growth. I wasn't perfect, but I was confident, and that was enough. After I reached day 90 and completed the challenge I set for myself, I expected life to suddenly become easy, like all the fear would disappear and all the confidence would stay forever. But life doesn't work that way. Confidence isn't a switch you turn on. It's a muscle that needs maintenance, a fire that needs fuel. And even though I completed the journey, I felt like something was still unfinished. I had become confident in many small situations, but I still needed to test myself in a real, high-pressure moment. Something that truly showed me how much I had grown. I didn't know what that moment would be or when it would come, but I trusted that life would put me in front of it when I was ready. And it did, sooner than I expected. A few days after finishing the 90 days, my manager approached me and said there was an opportunity to represent our team in a meeting with a partner company. It wasn't a presentation, but it required speaking, explaining, and giving updates. A year ago, I would have avoided this like a disaster. Even 6 months ago, I would have panicked. But now, when she asked me, I didn't feel fear first. I felt possibility. I felt curiosity. I felt the old fear wake up inside me, but instead of controlling me, it simply reminded me of how far I'd come. And before I could talk myself out of it, I said, "Yes, I can do it." The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a little rush of adrenaline, the good kind, the kind that tells you you're stepping into growth. The days leading up to the meeting were a test of everything I had learned. Instead of rehearsing obsessively, I reviewed the important points calmly. Instead of doubting myself, I reminded myself of every small victory I earned in those 90 days. Instead of imagining the worst-case scenario, I asked myself real questions. What if it goes well? What if they actually like what I say? What if this is the moment that proves all the hard work was worth it? The old me never asked those kinds of questions. The old me only prepared for failure, but the new me was learning to prepare for success. On the morning of the meeting, I woke up with nervous energy vibrating inside me, but it didn't feel like fear. It felt like readiness. I got dressed more carefully than usual, paying attention to every detail. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to look like the person I had worked so hard to become. When I arrived at the office, my manager smiled at me and said, "You've got this." And for the first time in my life, I believed those words. I walked into the meeting room with steady footsteps, my shoulders open, my eyes forward, and my breath controlled. The partner team was already there, sitting around the table, talking confidently. Normally, this kind of atmosphere would shrink me, but instead, I sat down, placed my notebook in front of me, and felt a quiet strength in my chest. The meeting started, and a wave of voices filled the room, people exchanging ideas, updating each other, asking questions. I listened carefully, not because I was preparing to speak, but because I genuinely felt part of the conversation. When my turn finally came, my manager looked at me and nodded. And in that second, the world slowed down. I felt a tiny flash of fear rise inside me, like a shadow trying to return. But I also felt every moment of my 90-day journey behind me. Every uncomfortable action, every deep breath, every tiny victory, every moment I stayed 2 seconds longer, every time I pushed myself when I didn't feel ready. All of that became fuel. All of that became armor. I started speaking. My voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't too soft. It wasn't too fast. It was clear, calm, natural. I explained the update step by step, with a voice that felt grounded. I made eye contact. I smiled. I paused when needed. I didn't hide. I didn't shrink. I didn't retreat inside my mind. I stayed present through the entire thing. And when I finished, something happened that I will never forget. The partner team nodded, asked follow-up questions, and wrote down notes like my input mattered. They weren't pretending. They were listening. They respected what I said. And in that moment, I realized something life-changing. Confidence is not a fantasy. It's not something reserved for special people. It's something you build, and I had built it with my own hands. After the meeting ended, my manager came up to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Great job," she said. "You've improved so much." And instead of brushing off the compliment like I always used to do, I accepted it with a smile. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. I walked out of that meeting room feeling different, not because I did something extraordinary, but because I finally saw myself as capable, strong, and worthy. I felt proud of the person I had become. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged in spaces I used to avoid. That afternoon, as I sat at my desk, something emotional hit me. I remembered the interview I failed months earlier. I remembered the silence in the room, the fear choking my voice, the shame burning in my cheeks, the tears that fell when I left the building. I remembered thinking I would never change. And now, here I was, speaking confidently in a room full of professionals, contributing ideas, earning respect. It felt like life had brought me back to the same test, just in a different form, to show me how different I had become. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was growing. That night, when I walked home, I didn't feel like the old Daniel at all. I walked with my head higher, my steps stronger, my heart lighter. I looked around at people passing by and realized I wasn't imagining their judgment anymore. I wasn't creating fear inside my mind anymore. I was simply living. And living confidently felt like breathing clean air for the first time. I went home, opened my notebook, and wrote one sentence that made me smile from the inside out. Today, I met the version of me I've always wanted to become. I wasn't done growing, I wasn't done learning, but today I proved something important. The new version of me was real, and he wasn't leaving. After that big moment in the meeting, something inside me changed quietly but powerfully. It wasn't loud confidence. It wasn't the kind of confidence where you walk into a room and try to dominate everyone. It was something deeper, something calmer, something that felt like finally finding my place in the world. But here's the truth. Even when you grow, even when you achieve something big, life has a way of testing you again. Not to punish you, but to make sure your confidence is real, not just a lucky moment, not just temporary motivation, but a part of who you truly are. And within the next few days, life gave me a test I didn't expect. A couple of mornings after the successful meeting, my manager asked me to join another discussion with the partner company, this time with a slightly larger group. It wasn't a presentation, but it required speaking again, sharing updates again, and answering questions again. Old me would have panicked, but new me felt a strange sense of acceptance. It wasn't excitement or fear, it was readiness. I said yes immediately. But when the day came, something unusual happened. As I walked toward the conference room, old anxiety suddenly whispered in my ear again. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. What if this time you fail? What if the last meeting was just luck? What if people notice you're still learning? Those thoughts tried to wrap themselves around my mind like vines. And for a moment, I felt myself slipping back into old patterns, checking my posture too much, overthinking how I would greet people, worrying about how I would sound. But then I remembered something important. Fear doesn't mean you're going backward. Fear means you're stepping forward. Fear shows up when you're about to grow again. So instead of fighting the anxiety, I accepted it. I took a deep breath and thought, okay, you're here, but I'm still going in. And I walked into that room, not fearless, but brave. Being brave doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you move, even when everything inside you tells you to stop. As soon as the meeting began, I felt the tension in my shoulders slowly soften. People were speaking normally, exchanging ideas just like the last time. The partner team looked relaxed, confident, and friendly. There was no pressure from them. The only pressure was the one I had created in my own head. When my turn came, I spoke calmly again. This time, something was different. It felt natural, not forced, not rehearsed, not controlled. Natural. I wasn't pretending to be confident, I was just being myself. I answered questions without fear, clarified a small detail, and asked one question of my own. When the meeting ended, someone I didn't even know said, "Thanks, Daniel." That explanation was helpful. And I smiled because I knew those words weren't just about my contribution. They were proof that my confidence was becoming consistent. But the real test didn't come in meetings or professional situations. It came in a moment I wasn't prepared for. About a week after the second meeting, a new co-worker joined our team. She was friendly, outgoing, and full of energy, the kind of person who made conversations look easy. One evening, we both happened to be leaving the office at the same time. She waved at me and said, "Hey, want to walk to the train station together?" That simple question triggered something strange inside me. For years, Walking with someone meant pressure. Having to talk, having to fill silence, having to pretend I wasn't awkward. I felt that old panic try to rise again, but this time I didn't let it take control. I forced a smile and said, "Sure, let's go." As we walked, she talked freely, telling me about her background, where she worked before, what she liked about the company. And instead of feeling pressured to perform, I actually listened. I wasn't stuck inside my head. I wasn't analyzing every sentence. I wasn't watching myself from the outside. I was just there, walking, talking, being present. When it was my turn to speak, I spoke naturally. She laughed at some of my comments, not because they were hilarious, but because I wasn't trying too hard. She wasn't laughing at me. She was laughing with me. By the time we reached the station, I realized something beautiful. I was capable of connection, real connection, genuine connection, and not the forced, awkward kind, but the kind that happens when you allow yourself to simply exist as you are. Later that week, something even more surprising happened. A coworker invited me to join a small after-work gathering. The old version of me would have avoided it instantly. "I'm busy, I'm tired, maybe next time." Those were my usual excuses, but I knew that confidence doesn't grow in comfort, so I said yes. When I arrived at the cafe, I felt nervous for a moment, but then I remembered how far I had come. I sat down with the group, and this time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I didn't study everyone's faces or rehearse responses. I simply existed in the moment. During the gathering, someone asked how long I had been working at the company. I answered normally. Someone cracked a joke, and I added one of my own. People laughed, not politely, genuinely. For years, I believed I wasn't funny or interesting or someone people wanted to be around. But now I realized that wasn't true. The real problem wasn't that I lacked personality. It was that I had buried my personality under fear for too long. Now that fear was fading, and the real me was stepping forward. A me that could joke, share stories, respond naturally, and feel comfortable around others. When I left the gathering, I felt a strange emotion in my chest, something warm and unfamiliar. And then I understood it. It was belonging. Not because other people finally accepted me, but because I finally accepted myself. Belonging doesn't come from others. It comes from you. It comes from allowing yourself to show up fully. And that night, I showed up. The following days felt smoother. Conversations felt lighter. Social pressure felt weaker. I walked into rooms without shrinking. I walked out of rooms without replaying every sentence I said. Confidence wasn't something I was trying to do anymore. It was something I was living. And for the first time in my life, I felt not just confident, but alive. By the end of that week, I realized something powerful. Confidence is not built in dramatic moments. It's built in small choices. Saying yes when you want to say no, staying when you want to escape, speaking when silence feels safer, trying when failure feels possible, walking forward when your fear tells you to stop. That's how you become confident. Not in a day, not in a week, but in moments like these, where you choose the stronger version of yourself again and again. And the best part? I wasn't even finished yet. The biggest breakthrough was still waiting for me. As the days passed after that gathering, something inside me became clearer than ever. Confidence wasn't just changing the way I spoke or walked. It was changing the way I lived. I started to notice things I never saw before. I noticed how people reacted differently to me, how conversations opened naturally, how opportunities seemed to appear more often. It wasn't magic. It was energy. When you carry yourself like someone who belongs, the world treats you like someone who belongs. But I also realized that I wasn't done. I had only experienced confidence in everyday situations. I still hadn't faced the biggest test, the one thing that scared me more than meetings, conversations, or group gatherings, speaking in front of people in a way that truly mattered to me personally, not just professionally. And life, as always, delivered that test at the perfect time. One afternoon, my manager sent a message asking if I'd be willing to share a short reflection during our team's monthly meeting. Something personal, something about growth or lessons learned. At first, my stomach tightened. My hands felt cold. This wasn't just giving an update about a project, this was showing a part of myself. This was vulnerability. This was real. And realness always scared me more than anything else. My first instinct was to say no. Not because I didn't want to do it, but because I was scared of what people would think. I imagined myself stumbling. I imagined myself freezing. I imagined people staring. But then I stopped myself. I remembered who I used to be. The guy who ran from everything. The guy who hid in silence. The guy who believed he would never change. And then I remembered who I had become. Someone who had fought for every tiny step. Someone who didn't let fear make decisions anymore. So I said yes. The days before the meeting were a mental battle. Not a loud, dramatic battle, but a quiet one. The kind that happens when you lie in bed and your mind tries to convince you that you're not good enough. The old voice whispered, "What if people don't care? What if your story sounds stupid? What if you aren't as confident as you think?" But the new voice, the one I had built through 90 days of growth, answered back, "What if this is the moment you finally step into your full potential? What if this is the moment you prove to yourself that you're no longer trapped by who you used to be?" Those thoughts carried me through the week. On the day of the meeting, I felt both ready and terrified. I wore my best shirt, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I was stepping into something important. As I walked to the meeting room, my legs felt a little heavy, but my chest felt strong. I sat with my team, listening as everyone shared updates. And then, finally, my manager said, "Daniel has something he'd like to share with us today." My heart started beating faster, but I didn't let it control me. I stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and looked around the room. For a moment, everything went silent in my mind. Not in a panicked way, in a powerful way. I felt grounded, present, human. And then I started talking. I didn't read from notes. I didn't memorize anything. I just spoke from my heart. I talked about the interview I failed months ago. I talked about the fear, the shame, the silence. I talked about how much it hurt to feel small in situations where I knew I had potential. Then I shared how I decided to change, how I made a plan, how I faced discomfort, how I trained myself every day, how I learned to speak, how I learned to show up. I shared the truth, the vulnerable truth, without hiding. And something amazing happened. The room became completely still. People listened, really listened. Their eyes weren't judging me. Their faces weren't confused. They were connected to me. They were with me. And I realized something powerful in that moment. Vulnerability isn't weakness. Vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability is trust. Vulnerability is connection. As I continued speaking, I felt lighter and lighter. Words flowed naturally. My voice stayed steady. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to be honest, and honesty made me confident. At the end, I said, "I'm still growing. I'm not perfect, but I'm proud of who I'm becoming." And for the first time in my life, those words felt real. The room stayed silent for a moment, and then people started nodding. Someone clapped quietly, and the rest followed. It wasn't applause for performance. It was respect, appreciation, connection. When I sat down, I felt a rush of emotion, relief, pride, disbelief, gratitude, all mixed into one powerful moment. After the meeting, something unexpected happened. People came up to me individually and thanked me. One person said, "I needed to hear that today." Another said, "I relate to your story more than you know." Someone else said, "You've really inspired me to work on myself." And hearing those words made me realize something I never understood before. Confidence is not about being the best in the room. It's about allowing yourself to be seen. When you show your real self, you give others permission to show theirs. When you speak your truth, you help others find theirs. Confidence creates connection, the most powerful human experience. Later that evening, when I got home, I sat down and replayed everything in my mind. I remembered the boy who used to avoid conversations, the boy who felt invisible, the boy who whispered, the boy who ran from fear. And now, here I was, someone who spoke in front of a room full of people with courage, honesty, and presence. Someone who wasn't scared of being seen anymore. Someone who had new strength in his voice. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't see the old me at all. I saw someone new, someone who had earned his confidence through sweat, discomfort, and courage. As I lay in bed that night, something warm filled my chest, something beyond confidence, beyond pride. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the struggle, gratitude for the pain, gratitude for the journey. Because without the failure, without the fear, without the tears outside that interview building, I would have never become this version of myself. And as I closed my eyes, I thought to myself, if I could change this much in 90 days, what else is possible? When I woke up the morning after sharing my story with the team, the air felt different. Not lighter, deeper. It was like I had stepped into a new life without realizing it. For months, I had been working, pushing, training, fighting, growing. But that morning, for the first time, I felt the result of all of it running through my body. I stood in front of the mirror, and I didn't see a shy man pretending to be confident. I saw a confident man who used to be shy. There is a huge difference. One is acting. The other is becoming. And I realized that becoming confident doesn't happen in one moment. It happens quietly, slowly, through every small decision you make when nobody is watching. I touched the sink with both hands, looked myself in the eyes, and whispered, "You did it." Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. And that honesty made the words feel real. As I walked to work that day, the world didn't look different, but I felt different inside it. People passed by, cars moved, conversations filled the air, normal things. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a visitor. I felt like a participant, someone who had the right to speak, to act, to exist fully. I wasn't hiding in my mind. I wasn't shrinking my presence. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. Confidence didn't make me louder. It made me present. It made me real. And that presence made me walk with a sense of purpose I had never known before. When I arrived at the office, people greeted me differently, not with surprise or polite smiles, but with genuine warmth. They didn't see the old Daniel anymore. They saw someone reborn through effort, someone who had changed. And as I sat at my desk, I thought about the person I used to be. The one who stayed silent, avoided eye contact, replayed conversations in his head, feared judgment, feared mistakes, feared speaking, feared existing. That version of me felt distant now, like an old shadow I had finally stepped away from. But I didn't hate him. I felt compassion for him. He wasn't weak. He was scared. And all he needed was someone brave enough to guide him. Someone I had become. Later that day, I had a short conversation with the new coworker who had walked to the train station with me. She smiled and said, "You seem different this week, more relaxed." And instead of denying it or pretending nothing had changed, I said, "Yeah, I think I'm growing." She nodded and replied, "It shows." Those two words stayed with me for hours. It shows. Not because I told people, not because I acted differently on purpose, but because change always shows. In your posture, your tone, your eyes, your reactions. Confidence isn't something you announce. It's something you carry. In the afternoon, my manager asked if I could support a new employee who needed help understanding part of our workflow. Months ago, this request would have scared me. I would have worried about sounding stupid or not explaining things clearly. But now, I felt calm. I walked to the meeting room, sat with the new employee, and spoke naturally. I didn't overthink. I didn't rush. I didn't try to prove anything. I simply explained things step by step. Halfway through our conversation, I noticed something that made me smile inside. My voice sounded steady, comfortable, and confident without any effort. It wasn't something I was controlling. It was something I had become. That evening, as I walked home, I felt a wave of reflection wash over me. I thought about the 90 days I had lived, the fear, the discomfort, the awkward moments, the challenges, the small victories, the setbacks, the breakthroughs. I thought about every day I forced myself to act even when I didn't feel ready. I thought about the invisible walls I broke, and then something powerful hit me. Confidence was never the final destination. Confidence was just the beginning. Confidence wasn't the reward, it was the tool. A tool that would allow me to build the life I always wanted, but was too afraid to chase. When I got home, I opened my notebook, the same one I started on the first day of the journey, and flipped through every page. I read the old notes, the painful entries, the small goals, the little victories I wrote down when they didn't seem like much. And I realized something beautiful. The person writing those early entries had no idea how strong he was about to become. He had no idea how much he would grow. He had no idea how deeply he would change. But he showed up anyway, even when it hurt, even when he doubted himself, even when the progress felt invisible. And showing up is the real definition of confidence. I wrote one last entry at the bottom of the notebook. Confidence isn't something you wait for, it's something you build. And if I can build it, anyone can. As I put the notebook away, I felt a wave of emotion rise in my chest. gratitude, pride, disbelief, hope. Not because I had reached the end of something, but because I had reached the beginning of a new version of my life. A life where fear no longer controls me. A life where I speak when I need to speak. A life where I raise my hand. A life where I try even when I'm unsure. A life where I don't hide. Before going to bed that night, I looked at myself in the mirror one more time. My reflection looked familiar but new. The same face, the same eyes, the same body, but a different energy, a different presence, a different belief. And I whispered something softly, a message not just for myself, but for anyone who feels stuck where I once was. If you want to change your life, start with the small moments. Start with the uncomfortable actions. Start with the fear, because fear is not the enemy. Fear is the doorway. As I turned away from the mirror, I felt a calm certainty settle inside me. My 90-day journey was complete, but my real life was just beginning. I wasn't the shy man anymore. I wasn't the invisible one. I wasn't the one who froze in interviews. I wasn't the one who feared being seen. I had become someone new, someone confident, someone present, someone alive. And the most powerful part of all was knowing this truth deep in my soul. Confidence is not a gift. It is a choice. And I chose it every single day until it became part of who I am.